Chapter 24, Andora's Afterthoughts. It is hard to believe that it has been 4 years since Danielle passed. It has been the most exciting time of my life since that endeavor. I don't know how I would have managed had the support not appeared. Although the support didn't always come in ways that I expected. I could have never expected the largest form of support to arrive in a little 6-pound bundle of love. Andora, Danielle's little white Pomeranian, would leave her most significant mark on me, and now I'm honored to share some of those experiences. The amount of joy and happiness that Andora brought into my life was invaluable. I couldn't have managed the grief and anger successfully without her. The companionship was great, but it was her constant happiness that kept me happy too. It was practically impossible to be sad around such a cute and lovable dog. She always knew how to cheer me up. Andora was indeed a gifted therapy dog. It would be Andora that would finish the grand chapter of my life in writing my book only 4 days after my book release party. It was just shy of a 4-year journey to complete the book, which was honestly a monumental task in itself. The voyage, riddled with small and big challenges, also happened with supernatural coincidences. However, in a final act of synchronicity, the unbelievable and unthinkable occurred. My book release party was the day before Valentine's Day, February of 2020. I felt the date was another synchronicity as my story was a love story, although not like any most people expect. I was so happy to share the book with the community as I had spent so many years working on it. Finally, the completion of a considerable part of my life was coming to a close. I could see that as those doors closed, many new doors were beginning to open. I was heading into my first weekend back at art shows after taking the winter off to finish my book. Andora would always come to all my shows with me. It was a pleasure and joy to have her sitting in the chair smiling at everyone. She was incredible at luring people to the booth for attention, as she never seemed to get enough attention. I anticipate that she did a rather good job of increasing my sales by doing that. However, Andora truly loved being at the art shows with me, and I would make sure to spoil her for her successes. I would set up her double chair princess throne with her purple princess pillow on one side and a comfy blanket on the other. During the hot months, she would even get ice packs under the blankets. I will admit that Andora was indeed a spoiled dog. However, she was always such a perfect angel, so I felt she earned it. She was so perfect that she would cheer up anyone who came to visit, and she had many friends at the art show who would come to visit her. Andora loved every minute of it. Personally, I was also excited to be able to display and share my book at the shows finally. Mostly, I was excited to share the copies with my family of vendors. They had likely heard the most about my progress over the previous 3 years. That group alone probably purchased or traded me for more books than I sold at my book release party. It also ended up being one of the best weekends I've had as an Organite art vendor. That was until Sunday night as I was packing up the show to go home. As I was packing up my car in the middle of the parking lot, Andora started to have an allergy attack. Many of the trees were pollinating, and she tends to have some respiratory issues when there is poor air quality. Fire smoke is the most irritating to her sensitive little Pomeranian throat. I had spent one evening a year earlier with her coughing the whole night because of local fires. Usually Andora would have a cough or two during allergy season, but this evening would be different. Andora went into a cough attack without any of her prescription medicines available. I had some CBD and throat herbs I was giving her all day, but it didn't seem to handle this most recent attack. I didn't have the Benadryl or the oxy something the doctor gave us. It was practically the worst time for me to have this occur, as I could have run to the store to grab the Benadryl if I wasn't in such a rush to pack up and move my car. By the time I finished, I quickly hopped in the car for a quick 8-minute ride home, but we would have a cough continue most of the way. I started to have a real moment with her in the car. I wanted to help her, but I felt so bad that I couldn't get it under control. I cried out for help and I practically started crying. We thankfully made it home as my anxiety was through the roof. I hadn't had a moment like that in quite some time, and it was mostly due to Andora's calm demeanor. Now that she wasn't calm and happy, it was throwing me off my game. Thankfully, it would all change quickly after we made it to my room. I quickly pulled out the medications from under the sink and began dosing her with the Benadryl first. By the time I gave her the 3rd dose, she was already showing signs of the cough stopping. I gave her a dose of the oxy medicine the doctor gave us for this specific instance. Thankfully, after 20 minutes, everything was back to normal. I was so relieved, and we set in for the night. The next morning, I gave Andora her supplements and some Benadryl when we woke up, but we had to go on an errand that morning, and I figured she'd be okay for the journey. Andora went everywhere with me. and I would never leave her at home. Otherwise, I would potentially face her wrath. Something I never did after she got Danielle and me. A story I didn't get into much detail previously in the story. It just so happened that when Danielle and I first got together, it made Andorra very jealous. Apparently, Andorra wasn't pleased with me at the time since we were not paying enough attention to her. The first outburst came with her taking a poo on my side of the bed. After rubbing her face in it, I put her in timeout. She seemed to have gotten the message because the next thing she did was pee on my side of the bed and pooed next to my side of the bed. Again, she had her face rubbed in the pee and yet again was put in timeout. What happened next blew me away. The following days, we noticed that Andorra started bleeding out of her little bottom. These incidents sent Danielle into a big concern as it worsened. We immediately scheduled an appointment with the vet. After a short time with Andorra, the vet told us that they couldn't seem to find a problem. They explained to us that it appeared to be psychological. I couldn't believe it, and neither could Danielle, so we went home to figure out our next step. We sat Andorra down in her chair and proceeded to have a conversation with her. We explained that we were sorry that she felt ignored. We would make sure to give her much more attention, and that is exactly what we did. I was surprised to find the issues we were having with Andorra disappeared immediately, which eventually built the strong relationship that Andorra and I carried through the process of losing Danielle. Since Danielle's passing, Andorra went everywhere with me. I always made sure to bring her usual needs in my bag, including the Benadryl this time. However, in this adventure, Andorra would have another cough attack at the worst possible time. It would be about 20 minutes for me to get home to her oxy medicine. That always seemed to work no matter what, but I just didn't think that we would need it that morning. Plus, it was a red liquid and would always get everywhere, so I just didn't think about bringing it on a quick journey. I got home that morning and gave her a few doses of the medication, which again helped immediately. That afternoon, she ended up napping, and we went for our usual sunset walk after she woke up. The next 24 hours went smoothly. I was preparing for ecstatic dance that Tuesday and was super excited to do some dancing that day. A romantic interest of mine was also going to be attending that evening. We'd only met a week prior, but things were going well, inspiring me to make an extra special playlist. After our morning walk, I ended up giving Andorra a couple additional doses of Benadryl, as she coughed several times on the hike. Nothing terrible, but I just didn't want to let her keep aggravating her sensitive throat. After my shower, I realized that I might have given her too much medicine. The best way to explain it was that she almost appeared drunk. I felt terrible about over-medicating her, so I kept checking on her constantly. She seemed fine as she was giving kisses and smiling ear to ear. Like I said, the best way to explain it was she appeared drunk. I wasn't much concerned as the coughing issue was something we had dealt with in the past. It was just an unlucky synchronicity to have the attacks occur when they did. But now everything seemed okay. I ended up picking up an angel on the side of the road that day, walking to the dance. It was perfect that I ended up picking up Gabriel, who was also able to watch Andorra as I put my pack together. She was still having a drunk moment, and that was all I could think was the problem, considering she had a good run earlier that morning. This would be the first time ever that Andorra was not able to hike up to the dance spot on Cathedral Rock in 2 years of hosting ecstatic dance. I made the best of it, and for the first time I carried her up. Little did I know how grateful I would be for that moment I was able to share. At the dance, Andorra just sat in her chair, smiling on her pillow, just like she always does. She brought smiles to many faces just sitting there and even had several hikers say hello. 2 people also commented that she appeared drunk, and I said I might have given her too much Benadryl. By the end of the dance, things were a little different. I was expecting her to be better, but she wasn't feeling like running around like usual. I walked Andorra down the mountain holding her again, realizing that her breathing was becoming a bit more shallow. It was a bit concerning, but sadly there wasn't anything I could do with that late in the evening, so we just went home. I gave her a little more medicine, hoping that it might calm her down as she was just sitting up breathing. It almost seemed like she didn't want to lay down and close her eyes, but I couldn't explain it. I kept petting her and saying hi to her every 15 to 20 minutes. I started to realize that I would likely need to take her to the vet in the morning if this shallow breathing continued. I looked back from the computer, noticing that she had found a spot she found more comfortable, and I went and bundled her up. She just stayed there and seemed very content and didn't seem like she was suffering. Just a bit uncomfortable, and now looking back, she was likely a little scared. It was truly an honor to be by her side as she passed into the beyond quietly, without my knowing. As I look back, realizing that she had stopped breathing, I immediately rushed to pick her up. I cried out for her as I wanted her to come back to me. It was such a shock to me, a shock that I was not prepared for in the least. I continued to cry with her in my arms as thankfully I was also home alone. In another bout of synchronicity, my romantic partner, who had only manifested in my life a week prior, would also manifest this evening. I called her in tears explaining the situation, and she, without missing a beat, offered to come over and be with me. I accepted the offer and thanked her for that. After that call, I knew I needed to call someone else. I had to tell my family and roommate. My dad was the only person that I wanted to call in my family, so that was the first person I called. It was a productive conversation as I was having a moment of I should haves. Like I should have taken her to the vet earlier that day, or I should have realized something was seriously wrong, or I should have been able to prevent this from happening. My dad put many of those to rest as I always did everything I could for her. I loved Andorra so much and never would have put her unknowingly at risk. I asked my dad at the end of the conversation to tell my mom and also call my sister. The reason was that I felt I was not in a place to talk to either of them. Both my mom and sister have the capacity to trigger me, especially during moments of vulnerability. So in alignment with my strong beliefs, I asked my dad if he would personally tell both of them. It is important to me that he made the call, as I will further explain. After discussing many topics of the book, I have come across a severe problem we face as a society. Too much we have come to accept texting as a formal way of communication, which is sadly delusional. The disconnection that texting creates is possibly the main reason that I highly recommend never texting a death. I repeat and reiterate that you should never text an important person's death to anyone for any reason. It's bad enough most people learn about it through social media, and calls should always be made before you create those posts. People deserve a phone call. Texting a death is irresponsible, cowardly, and disrespectful to the person who passed. I believe people deserve the call for so many reasons. The main reason a call should be made is to respect the person in the beyond. Considering the extensive proof that those people are still with us, it makes sense to appreciate them in life and death. To show them respect and be a respectful human by making the call. It is a respect to show that courage and strength during a time of hardship. People deserve respect in life and death, and please don't forget that. The second reason why you make the call is for the person you are calling. Simply stated, the person that is getting the phone call deserves to receive the information in a way that is best for them. Merely asking them to sit down or checking to make sure that they are somewhere safe is crucial. Imagine all the places that a text can be received that could create another tragedy. People could be driving, or anywhere someone doesn't have the support they need could lead to another tragedy. People deserve to have someone helping during a moment of crisis. I have several bad examples of this happening to me. While I wish my family had understood that message before Danielle's passing, I think I've made it clear my feelings on the subject now. I have personally received 3 death texts from my mother in the past. All texts were horrible in the way they were received, as I will explain in 2 of the cases. The first death text I received arrived on my phone 4 hours after my family had started a wake for my grandmother. I was so upset since my phone at the time was acting up and text messages were not arriving on time. My family was unaware of this at the moment and didn't have the thought to call me. Sadly, at the time, I was sitting at a restaurant depressed because I was a day late to my friend's graduation, since I also received that text a day late. So this really hit home when I didn't get a call from my family. Only a week later, I would receive a text from my sister about my parents putting my dog Sophie to sleep without me even knowing. The text that told me my dog was dead was, "Sorry to hear about Sophie," which my response was, "Did Mom seriously put my dog to sleep without telling me?" The same Sophie who also appeared to Danielle. It was an interesting time for me because at that time I started having interesting messages appear. Over the several days that Sophie was in heaven without my knowledge, I started getting signs. The first was a polar bear rock that was gifted to me. Then another bear sign in the form of a statue that my friend and I found. And finally, I opened a random book to a page all about bears. It would be shortly after my realization that Sophie would start to appear to me as a giant white polar bear. It would be Sophie that made contact with Danielle before she passed in the form of an angel. It is far easier to cope knowing that those that have passed are still around us. However, I couldn't deny the sadness or the anger at the time. I sadly received both of my parents' texts 2 weeks after they put Sophie to sleep. Those texts only fed my rage towards me not knowing because they couldn't pick up the phone. The uncertainty of texts and when people receive texts is the main reason I ask for people to make the call. Also, please don't leave a message or text if you don't get through right away. Have that person call you back before dropping the info bomb. I would learn this lesson the hard way from my own family. I had asked my dad to call my sister in Thailand to let her know about Danielle's passing. He couldn't reach her initially, so he texted the message. Thankfully, I personally didn't learn this until a year after her passing, as I don't think I would have handled the situation healthily. While I was still upset, I was able to communicate to them just how angry I was. I gave them both my ultimatum about death texts. I have stated to my family to never, and I mean never, text me a death, especially if you want me to attend the funeral of that person. At this point, my own father could pass, but out of respect for him, if I received a death text, I would not attend the funeral. I do that as respect to my father, as I feel it would be disrespectful to create a massive scene about why you don't text a death at his funeral. It is that important of an issue to me and something I will stand up for, and I'm not against a sit out when it comes to a protest. It is a much healthier way to express my anger than to ruin someone's funeral because someone else couldn't respect that person. So make the call. I can't deny the sadness, guilt, and anger that comes along with losing those you hold closest. It isn't something many of us deal with regularly, I hope. In those times of crisis, we are tested. We don't need to cause additional hurt and trauma because we can't face our own emotions. Those unable to communicate with others need, and I mean need, to find people who are capable of passing the message on to everyone. I use my dad, and he is an excellent example despite the past failures. Thankfully, I feel my family understands my stance on the topic, and now I hope others can learn from our mistakes. I was happy that my dad called my sister when Andorra passed. I didn't have the emotional strength to call anyone else except my roommate. She immediately knew what had happened as I was crying profusely. She was sorry that she couldn't be there, but I thanked her for her kind words and prepared for my friend to arrive. I needed emotional support more than ever. Suddenly losing Andorra had dramatically changed my life, and I couldn't deny that. It was a lot to process all at once, but still, processing the feelings helped me cope with the trauma. It hit me hard to realize that I no longer would be traveling all over town with her strapped to my chest. I could already feel the sadness in the city. I would have to say, with everything, the only thing I dreaded the most was having to tell everyone in town, especially Andorra's closest friends. I always used to say that Andorra had more friends than I did in Sedona, mostly because she had a whole collection of her friends from her life with Danielle as a dance teacher's dog. Many girls would wave when we would see them, and Andorra would always make them smile. Andorra would make almost everyone smile, and that was something else I couldn't believe was gone. My temporary roommate at the time arrived home about an hour after my friend had arrived. Thankfully, I had settled down by the time the both of them came, as I was a big mess for the 30 minutes after it happened. I couldn't believe what had happened and was still trying to process through the trauma. It was difficult for me to not see the silver lining in the experience, as she passed just after I finished my book, and after I met someone who would help me through the experience. My roommate had even mentioned that miraculous occurrence of someone coming into my life. It even made me a little less worried about Andorra acting out towards any potential romantic partners. I couldn't help but tell my friend about how Andorra messed with me when I first started dating Danielle. I was a bit relieved to not have to worry about Andorra's jealousy anymore. Even Danielle said that Andorra loved me more than her, so I can only imagine the jealousy could have been worse than when I entered the picture. Honestly, it was a huge relief not to have to worry about that future issue. Now with the book finished, Andorra was giving me a vast opportunity to also practice what I was preaching. Considering my book is all about how death isn't the end, it honestly couldn't have been more synchronistic. That revelation really helped me to see that there was more to this experience than merely Andorra dying. It happened after dance nearly 1 year after Danielle made her presence known at Ecstatic Dance on the Rocks. It felt like it was meant to happen, and there was so much evidence pointing to that. I would also state for the 6 months before my book release, I was telling people about how Andorra fixed my PTSD. In fact, I credit her with much of my recovery because of her perfect example. I would always aim to be more Andorra-like, and that striving made me happier, more loving, and incredibly calm. All things that don't exist when you have severe PTSD. I had thankfully overcome the disorder, and it was Andorra who helped bring that new order into my life. So as much as I loved having Andorra in my life, she really had given me all the tools I needed to continue on my path to recovery. Now I would have to face those challenges without her as a physical crutch. However, as much as she wouldn't be a physical presence anymore, I couldn't escape her presence. The messages would be just as profound as the messages Danielle passed on after she went to the beyond. 2 days after Andorra's passing, I was invited to a Kuan Yin channeling hosted by one of my close dance friends. A truly magnificent experience like no other. I showed up without Andorra, and several people were immediately wondering why she didn't arrive. I initially skirted an answer. I had to gather them as I told them the news. We all shared a beautiful embrace before settling into our seats. While we were waiting on several more people to arrive, we started talking about the experience and how it coincided with my book release. My friend informed me that another attendee was also writing a book, and her story was just as wild as mine. The woman's son had passed, and now she was in the process of writing a channeled book with him from the beyond, which I felt had occurred to some degree with Danielle in writing my book. I still think this book is divinely inspired. Several minutes after that conversation, the other writer passed on another amazing angel message. She informed me that Danielle and Andorra were enjoying dancing in heaven together. I was blown away by the news, as I don't think we discussed much about dancing. And that would be the exact thing that they would be doing together. It was indeed a powerful confirmation that Andorra was doing good. The channeling session started and continued for nearly 2 hours, which was a magnificent experience to say the least. The host was a conduit for Kuan Yin and her essence. To say my friend took on an entirely different demeanor would be an understatement, as she started to speak with a brand new vigor and cadence. It didn't feel like my friend anymore, but something more, and with messages that still blow my mind. It was Kuan Yin's final message that left the most significant mark. I had made a soft answer on the side to a question she asked, which I had not done throughout the channeling. Now I was soloed out of the group for a message, and Kuan Yin made it clear that she had a message specifically for me. She explained to me that there was a little being on her side that was doing really well and wanted to let me know she loved me. It shocked me to my core. Tears of joy filled my eyes as I felt Andorra's presence with me. After the channeling, I would also discover that my friend, who I had picked up on the side of the road the day she passed, had an experience with Andorra too. He told me that he was playing Frisbee with her during the entire channeling session. He confirmed another holy trinity of messages from the beyond. This was one of the few experiences that I can honestly say compares to some of the lessons I have had from Danielle. I felt Danielle needed to pass those previous messages on to me to cement my beliefs. Andorra was just making sure I didn't forget those lessons. The biggest synchronicity that came with finishing my book came with a real opportunity to practice what I preach. The message I took from Kuan Yin was to not focus on the negative. I realized how easy it could be to get sucked into the sadness involved around Andorra's passing, to discuss the details or how bad I was doing. Most people responded with sincere regret or sadness when I delivered the news. I could tell immediately that it was going to be an uphill battle to focus on the positive. People love to dwell on the negative versus accentuate the positive. Creating the opposite was my goal. Surprisingly, I would show significant success in my new mission. As I delivered the message, I would explain how hard it is to be sad, considering Andorra is still with us. I would tell people about the channeling session and restate that she's in a good place with her mother. I personally just have to close my eyes and think of her to have her cheer me up. I've also learned that at least 6 other people do the same thing, and she appears every time. Although, like her mother Danielle, she seems to do more work in dreams. I've had many more people explain that Andorra visits them in their dreams now, stating it started happening shortly after her passing. Those joyful visits would confirm to others that she truly is still with us. I had thankfully had those experiences too, although the first month was weird when I would realize it was just a dream. That part was challenging and uplifting at the same time, considering I don't have much control over my dreams yet. Dreaming is still a skill I am cultivating. That first week after her passing was a challenge, as I could only handle telling a few people a day. It was a lot to manage my feelings while maintaining that demeanor I desired, and it would take real strength on my part. The strength was to not get into the details of her passing or dwell on the sadness. So many people feed off that energy without ever realizing they are just perpetuating those feelings. I didn't want to feel sad every time I talked to someone, and honestly, neither did Andorra. The last thing Andorra wanted for me was to be sad about her passing. In fact, every time I tried to be sad, she would appear in my mind to remind me that she was still here. She even talks in the voice I gave her on the book video chapters, which is even funnier for me. Do you think it's easy to be sad with a helium voice Pomeranian cheering you up? Honestly, it's impossible, and I tried. Life was still pretty amazing for me, as I know all dogs go to heaven. I now had Andorra as my newest guardian angel. She was with her mother, who had passed on other messages that she was also doing great in heaven. They were both doing an outstanding job of looking out for me by passing on important messages. I now felt there was so much to look forward to at the completion of my book. Now that one chapter closed, it meant that another was opening. My life would forever be changed by having Andorra in my life, and now I had to face the community. The first week was also strange because I realized just how much time I spent with Andorra. We usually spent an hour minimum every day taking walks. I usually had to take her out for 2 to 3 adventures, with one of those always being a bike ride. Andorra loved the bike rides more than anything else in the world and would spin donuts for up to 10 minutes to express her happiness. Now I didn't have to spend all that time getting ready and taking her supplies with me. Andorra was as close to having a child without actually having one. The only nice thing being is that I could leave her alone without being a neglectful parent. But truthfully, I rarely did that. So now I found my life to be far more manageable from the standpoint of merely going on errands or taking a short trip. I found Andorra to be so much lighter in spirit, including not having to carry her 15-pound chair up the mountain every Tuesday for ecstatic dance on the rocks. I couldn't deny the ease of my new life was providing. It was hard not to feel guilty about the joy I felt from not having to carry an extra 20 pounds up a mountain. It was even harder to accept that everything I was planning on doing for the following several months would be easier without her. I had an employee helping me to do 2 art shows every weekend, starting only 2 weeks after Andorra's passing. I was going to be a massive challenge to do that with Andorra coming along for the adventure. However, I also didn't expect for the great pause to happen right after my first double art show weekend. Although even there, I can't deny that Andorra somehow knew that the world was about to hit the fan. It was even more eye-opening as I realized that many of the foods that she liked were in short supply. I can't deny the synchronicity. To top that off, I don't know how I would have been able to take her to Tuesday dance with the lockdown closing the closest trailhead. The new parking location would be an easy hour-plus hike at her stop to smell the roses pace. I still swear she knew something was about to happen. I feel that everything happens for a reason, but sometimes it takes time to see the real reasons. If it was all to get me to write this book, then I feel the universe was successful. Everything that happened to me from start to finish was one big series of synchronicities. From the moment I met Danielle to the moment she passed 6 months and 1 day after we were married. I can't even imagine the odds of her picking the day we were married as the day she was also diagnosed with cancer. To have Andorra pass only 4 days after the book release, followed by a trinity of messages to confirm everything was okay, really made the experience feel otherworldly. Having a connection to those who are in heaven is mind-blowing to say the least. The experiences could quickly redefine someone's current reality, as it did for me. If realizing that death is not the end is the one thing that people walk away with, then I feel successful in writing this book. If I can help people understand that the struggles of life are there to help us grow, then I feel doubly fruitful. Everything on this planet has a purpose, and it is up to us to find the purpose through our actions. I also feel a significant purpose of mine was to expose the criminal for-profit medical industry for the actions taken during my wife's illness. If God wanted cancer gone, he or she definitely pissed off the right person. My mission is technically just beginning as I start to share my experience. The complete lack of common sense when caring for the health of an individual is pervasive in our medical establishment, as I learned. Considering doctors are not required to learn about nutrition, I think that should throw up some red flags for most people. The statistics show that less than 5% of doctors are educated in diet, and even the doctors we met showed their complete ignorance. Instead, I discovered that doctors are only pushing dangerous chemicals as cures while denying the failures of those very same treatments. If you doubt me, I recommend doing a little research into vaccines, as there is a $100,000 reward for anyone that can prove they are safe. All the other failures aside, I believe my wife is one of the medical system's greatest failures, and why the system needs to be dismantled, and the people in charge immediately jailed. It all must end, as the worldwide pandemic is also showing everyone how dangerous these people indeed can be. We can then start rebuilding a holistic medical model that includes everything that heals people. No longer will alternative treatments be forbidden from coverage or by doctor ignorance. We would have people who want to inform the public about their health for the sole purpose of keeping people healthy. Profit should be removed from healthcare, and I actually believe we should only pay doctors when we are healthy. I feel the incentive to keep us healthy would then be the priority. Subsidize the chronic illness that can't be cured, and we would all save billions in healthcare costs. All I'm trying to say is that there are better ways to do things, and I think we should approach healthcare differently because people need their rights back. People should have the option to choose and not be coerced into choosing based on what is best for the doctor's pocketbook. Everything our doctors are doing is for profit, pushing long-term treatments over inexpensive cures. I think I discussed this issue enough in my book, but I can't reiterate the importance. I have personally listened to a dozen radical, with quotes, doctors discuss many of the health problems we face originate in the gut. Some of these radical doctors are even stating that all health problems arise in the gut. I personally don't know if diet and food are the cause of all issues, but since most doctors aren't even educated on the subject, I would question their knowledge immediately and trust those who are questioning. I don't know who we should listen to about nutrition, but I know it definitely shouldn't be our politicians. It is our politicians that pushed most of the regulations on the medical industry in the first place. The fact that there is a law requiring doctors to tell patients that they will die for not choosing to do chemoradiation or surgery is both criminal and, through the nocebo effect, killing people every day. Again, if all medications are required to beat the placebo test, then I would expect doctors to understand the power of the nocebo effect. Ignoring the nocebo effect is medical science showing its ultimate ignorance about the ability of our mind to heal or hurt. Lastly, on a lighter note, if I can inspire people to show proper action when assisting the elderly or dying, then I have accomplished something genuinely magnificent. Even if it's just one person I inspire to get up and completely change the way we do things, then I feel that is possibly the greatest achievement of all. We all have the power to inspire and change the world. Now, who will you inspire? Thank you, Danielle and Andorra, for inspiring me to write and finish this book.